Reutu I te kaupapa o tēnei wahanga o tātou, ka tuaki au ki te tokorua e noho mai nei, kei muri au, I tēnei ki wā tonu. Nō reira, it's my privilege and pleasure, everybody, to introduce the next session to you, which will be held by two of our keynote speakers. And this is in a response to a journey that's been going on in the sector for the last, how long now, John? The last couple of years. And so Ani Mikaere, our first speaker, is going to present some thinking and some thoughts around engagement with Māori, and John, on behalf of the working group that's been engaged in this, is going to have the opportunity to respond. So, e te wahine teitu tei whā tei tei, e Ani, nau mai haere mai I wainga nui a tātou, me o pukenga, me o kōrero, me o na tikanga katoa, ki a taipari whakarewa ake tēnei wako o tātou. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to introduce Ani Mikaere and John McCarthy from the Tyndall Foundation, who will be offering some thoughts and responding. Kia ora.
Tēnā koe I te rangatira nā o tēnei wāhanga I wāwahi, ki te mihi. Me mihi hoki ka tika ki a Te Atiawa, ara te tangata whenua nā rātou anō koutou I pōwhiri I nā pōrā. Ko Ngāti Raukawa tēnei e mihi atu ana ki a koutou katoa. Tēnā koutou. It's probably difficult for most of us to imagine the choices that are faced by the philanthropist. From the odd occasion when I've dared to dream about what I could do if money was no object, I can certainly appreciate that the decisions may not be as straightforward as you might think. One of the dilemmas that philanthropy must surely grapple with is how to strike a balance between, on the one hand, meeting the immediate needs of groups and individuals in crisis, and on the other, investing in long-term structural and social change that would ultimately prevent such needs from arising in the first place. For example, how might the philanthropist respond to the undeniable harm that results from domestic violence? By funding services for the survivors of the violence, shelters, emergency grants, counselling and so on, and by ensuring that the individual and usually male perpetrators of violence are supported to change their behaviour, or by investing in a raft of long-term, large-scale social, economic and educational programs with the goal of ending all male violence by challenging sexism and dismantling patriarchy. Now, I'm not suggesting that projects that seek to help those in crisis should be abandoned in favour of those that promote broader transformation. The immediate needs of those who are suffering as a result of domestic violence, child poverty, homelessness, and a host of debilitating problems. Those problems can't just be ignored, and nor should they be. But in our very human desire to provide instant relief to individuals who are in dire need of support, we shouldn't forget about the equally important task of tackling the underlying causes of the problems which afflict them. To return to the example of domestic violence, we shouldn't surely be aiming merely for a society that punishes or that seeks to modify the violent behaviour of individual men towards women and children. Our ultimate goal, I would hope, is to create a world where such violence is never even contemplated. Now, I have no doubt that many of you support programs that aim for broader social transformation, as well as projects that deal with specific issues and groups. That said, though, it must be tempting to prioritise the latter. So, for instance, the almost instant gratification of the project-specific approach must be pretty hard to resist. After all, you wouldn't be involved in philanthropy unless you wanted to make a difference. And if you fund targeted projects which reach out to people in crisis, it should be relatively easy to gauge whether you have achieved your goals. The results are likely to be reasonably immediate and readily measured. How many people have been involved in the projects you've funded? How many of them have managed to turn their lives around as a result? On the other hand, working to achieve much broader social and structural change requires a long-term commitment. The results may not become apparent for years or even for decades. They won't lend themselves readily to quantification because the passage of time will inevitably mean that a range of other factors combine to produce the particular outcomes. So it may not be possible to point to any one element, such as your funding, as decisive. It might be said then that funding these kinds of programs is an act of faith. Nevertheless, investing in social transformation can be highly effective. It's been pointed out, for example, that in America, conservative foundations have achieved quite remarkable gains through the strategic funding of programs that have been explicitly designed to move national ideology and therefore government policy to the right. They have focused on shaping ideas by building strong right-wing institutions, such as think tanks, and by granting general operating support for those institutions. They have funded state and local level advocacy, institutions and intellectuals to advance a conservative agenda. Importantly, they have made long-term commitments to grantees, giving them the financial security to experiment and to find the most effective methods to achieve their goals. In a curious twist, it turns out that the undeniably impressive achievements of right-wing foundations in America have come despite the fact that they actually give away less money than liberal foundations. It seems that progressive funders, unable to ignore need and suffering, have lacked the ideological single-mindedness of the right, who have focused firmly on gaining political power and who have therefore taken great care to extract maximum political advantage from every dollar spent. It's an approach that commentators have said has paid off handsomely, enabling right-wing foundations to successfully pound their message into the heads of millions. And it makes you wonder, really, about the origins of Trump's America and what kind of role these right-wing foundations have played in creating the environment whereby a man like Donald Trump could be elected to president. Now, the experience of conservative foundations in America is probably not the most feel-good kind of story that philanthropy might like to tell about itself, but it is nevertheless revealing. What it tells us is that a focus on achieving broad social, economic, and political change through influencing ideas requires strategic thinking and a willingness to play the long game. Now, the understandable desire to see reasonable or reasonably rapid results, rather, this is not the only reason why philanthropy might shy away from supporting programs that are designed to achieve fundamental structural change. There's a more cynical but equally compelling explanation that concerns the elemental issues of power and privilege. To put it bluntly, the current political, economic, and social system has operated to benefit some at the expense of others. I suspect that many of you will be familiar with the Statistics New Zealand Household Net Worth Survey of 2015, which found that the wealthiest 10% of households in this country owned approximately half of the country's total wealth, while the poorest 40% owned just 3%. You may also be aware of the 2017 Oxfam study, which revealed that the wealthiest 1% of people in this country owned 20% of its wealth, while the poorest 90% owned less than half. It's probably no exaggeration to suggest that most, if not all, philanthropists fall within the ranks of the 1%. Now, this raises an obvious, if slightly thorny question. Why? Why would philanthropists support a program of action designed to dismantle the very system that has benefited them so richly. And there are plenty of commentators who have pointed out the illogicality of expecting philanthropy to undermine its own privilege, accusing even the most progressive of philanthropists of making no more than a few token gestures in the direction of structural transformation, while in truth continuing to perpetrate systems of oppression, exploitation, and domination. Now, for Māori, that oppression, exploitation, and domination came in the form of colonisation, including, but not limited to, the enforced removal of our land, so that the settler colony of New Zealand could take root and thrive. You will be well aware of the destruction that has been wrought upon Indigenous nations the world over in the name of colonisation, the mind-numbing proselytising, the devastating impact of introduced diseases, the stolen lands, the environmental despoliation, the calculated erasure of Indigenous land and identity. And it's been no different here. My iwi, Ngāti Raukawa, had the misfortune of occupying most of the arable land between two of the earliest New Zealand company settlements, Port Nicholson and Whanganui. Our lands, stretching from the Whangaihu River in the north to the Kukutauaki stream in the south, were openly targeted by company settlers and by successive Crown representatives from the moment they got here. We resisted the colonial state pressing in on us from all sides for as long as we could. And in fact, I'm astonished at how long we succeeded in doing so. But we couldn't hold out forever. By the early 1880s, our world had been turned upside down. Our population had suffered a dramatic decline as a result of wave after wave of introduced illnesses. Our philosophical foundations had been either nullified or grossly distorted by introduced religion. Our distinctive knowledge systems had been driven underground. The vast bulk of our lands had been stolen by a lethal combination of political skullduggery and judicial complicity. And our early experiences as participants within the colonial economy had ushered in forms of economic vulnerability that we had never before experienced. This experience was repeated with variations as to the detail, but with depressing commonality as to the outcome, throughout Aotearoa, as one iwi after another was thrust aside to make way for colonial ambition. The process of separating tangata from whenua was relentless, underpinned by the profound immorality of imperialism, which justified what was done on the basis that Europeans occupied first place in some kind of league table of humanity and were therefore entitled to claim the riches of the world for themselves. Now, enough of the history lesson. But in light of this history, it should surprise none of us to learn that by 2015, the net worth of the individual Māori person was, on average, just 1/5 of the net worth of the individual Pākehā person. Nor should we be shocked to find Māori featuring disproportionately amongst the people who are typically the beneficiaries of philanthropic programs: the poor, the homeless, the hungry, the ill, the addicted, and the criminalised. Now, those who subscribe to the kind of scientific quackery proposed by Charles Darwin might imagine that the explanation for these discouraging statistics lies in a genetic predisposition for failure. But in fact, experience the world over tells us that colonial oppression impoverishes and traumatises the colonised just as surely as it enriches and exalts the coloniser. There's no doubt that it is colonisation that has created the situation that we currently find ourselves in. Nor is there any doubt that colonialism, a word that I'm using in this instance to describe the philosophy that underpins and legitimises the process of colonisation, there is no doubt that colonialism is what keeps us here. So, what are the implications of this history for philanthropy in Aotearoa? As I've already indicated, I have no doubt that many of you currently support specific issue programs that meet the needs of individuals and groups, many of whom will be Māori. And the importance of that work cannot be underestimated. Making an immediate difference to the lives of people in crisis matters. However, I'm assuming that many, if not all of you, would prefer a world where the kinds of problems that afflict those in crisis do not occur in the first place. In other words, that you are open to the idea that what is needed is fundamental social, political, and economic change. I'm also hoping that you're willing to embrace the need for this kind of change, even if it means that you may have to relinquish some of your power and your privilege. The truth is that the state of New Zealand is founded upon the bedrock of colonialism. And this has implications for all of us, regardless of how we have come to be living here. It is just not possible to occupy a position of neutrality in the context of the colonial state. It has operated, it continues to operate, to privilege some at the expense of others. It has provided a beneficial environment within which to conduct your affairs. On the other hand, I don't have time to list the ways in which it has proven, in which it continues every day to prove detrimental to Māori. So you can maintain your privilege, dispensing charity to ameliorate the worst effects of colonialism, but offering no real challenge to the colonial structures that have impacted so profoundly on the Indigenous peoples of this land. Or you can choose to actively support efforts to dismantle those structures in the interests of creating a more just society for all. Now, clearly, there is no point waiting for the Crown to take the lead in decolonising Aotearoa. The Crown is irredeemably colonial in its outlook. It is patronising, it is arrogant, it is myopically focused on maintaining a vice-like grip on its ill-gotten power. You can tell that I've recently spent time in treaty negotiations. The Crown will have to be dragged, kicking and screaming, into a post-colonial Aotearoa. And while Māori are up for the task, allies are always appreciated. You are well placed to model responsible behaviour to the Crown, thereby implicitly challenging its worst conduct. You can demonstrate that it is possible to establish truly respectful relationships with Māori without the sky falling. What might it mean to develop a respectful relationship between philanthropy and Māori? Well, for starters, it would mean resisting the urge, no matter how strong, to be prescriptive. One of the first casualties of colonialism was rangatiratanga, the Crown refusing to accept the right of Māori to make our own decisions. It is not for the Crown, or for anyone else for that matter, to dictate to Māori how we can best undo the harm done to us over the past 180 years or so. As philanthropists, however, what you can do is support us in our endeavours to push back against nearly 2 centuries of colonialism. After all, when it comes to resisting colonialism, we've had plenty of practice. The mere fact of our survival is testament to that fact. Indeed, we've achieved some fairly remarkable results with little or no external support. By way of example, let me cite my own iwi. I spoke a little earlier about the devastating impact of colonisation on Ngāti Raukawa. Our experience was shared by 2 of our neighbouring iwi and our allies, Te Atiawa and Ngāti Toa Rangatira. By the 1970s, all 3 iwi were on the cusp of what we call cultural threshold. Cultural threshold is the tipping point beyond which recovery would be impossible. And in the 1970s, we were right on the precipice. Our marae were dilapidated and rarely used. No one under the age of 30 was able to speak Te Reo Māori. And our mātauranga, our unique knowledge traditions and philosophical framework, was rapidly disappearing along with Te Reo as the older generations passed on. In fact, things were so hopeless that my grandmother, who died aged 80 in the mid to late 1970s, she genuinely believed that her tangihanga would be the last. She thought that once her tangihanga was held, we would shut the doors and that would be the end of going to the marae. I can't imagine what that must have felt like for her, but she genuinely believed that. So in 1975, a bold strategy, Whakatupuranga Ruamano, was launched to reverse the fortunes of the three iwi. It was an iwi-driven initiative that sought to bring us back from the brink of cultural extinction. We were reliant on the voluntary efforts of our rapidly dwindling pool of native speakers and experts, and on the quite extraordinary generosity of people from other iwi who answered our pleas for help. We also relied, it has to be said, on a renewal of self-belief, something that over a century of contact with the coloniser had stripped away. Now, 4 decades later, while there's still much to be done, the results of Whakatupuranga Ruamano are evident. Marae throughout the three iwi have been refurbished or rebuilt. Speakers of Te Reo aged under 30 now number in the thousands. More of our people are actively participating in iwi affairs, and we're working really hard to reconnect with and to rejuvenate mātauranga. Te Wānanga o Raukawa, established in 1981, has played an important role in our recovery, and the town where the Wānanga is located, Otaki, has undergone a significant transformation since the 1970s. My grandparents' generation spoke fatalistically about Te Reo as a dying language, and they felt powerless to do anything about it. Today, there are numerous immersion education options available in Otaki, from the Kohanga Reo right through to Wānanga. And with the 2013 National Census revealing that approximately half of the town's Māori population are able to speak Te Reo, it is not surprising to find that its use has become normalised within many parts of the community. Now, it's important to note that Whakatupuranga Ruamano is merely representative of the creativity and the determination shown by iwi throughout the country, all of whom have been engaged in the struggle to survive the colonial encounter. It's also really important to acknowledge that while much has been achieved, the work is far from over. The work will be over when the shameful results of colonialism, as revealed by the prominence of Māori amongst the ranks of those in crisis, when those results are no longer present. What will it take to achieve this? The return and restoration of land and resources? Yes, certainly, but not simply to bring about a more equitable distribution of wealth. The oft unspoken cost of separating a people from the land that has sustained them for generations is the erasure of mātauranga, the knowledge that is generated out of their relationship with that land, alongside the obliteration of te reo, the language that has been developed and utilised to express that knowledge. And this is why, at Te Wānanga o Raukawa, we are so heavily focused on te reo and on mātauranga. We refer to the body of knowledge developed over time immemorial and handed on to us by generations past as the mātauranga continuum. It is this knowledge that makes us unique in the world. Without it, we cease to exist as distinctive in the global mosaic. Our survival as Māori is dependent upon our ability to discharge our responsibilities to nurture and grow the knowledge, repairing the enormous damage done over the past 2 centuries and handing it on in good shape so that future generations can continue developing and utilising it to meet their needs. The task of ensuring that we play our part as kaitiaki or as guardians of the mātauranga continuum consumes much of my time in my current role at Te Wānanga o Raukawa. Undoing colonialism will also require the redistribution of political power. As Mikaere mai, the J.R. Mackenzie Trust-funded Working Party on Constitutional Transformation, explained, Te Tiriti o Waitangi contemplated two independent spheres of influence, a rangatiratanga sphere, where Māori make decisions for Māori, and a kāwanatanga sphere, where the Crown makes decisions for its people. Te Tiriti also anticipated an interdependent sphere, the relational sphere, where Māori and Crown come together to make joint decisions affecting all. It's apparent that there is much to be done before we can say that the promise of Te Tiriti o Waitangi has been fulfilled. Now, the initiatives that I've been talking about are transformative programs that set their sights on the horizon of aspiration. Matike Mai suggested the year 2040 as an appropriate target for the achievement of constitutional transformation. Whakatupuranga Ruamano began with a 25-year lifespan, but its principles and its goals will continue to serve as touchstones for our iwi for the foreseeable future. And the wider project of bringing te reo Māori back from the brink of extinction has been underway, in fact, for nearly 70 years, ever since the Māori Women's Welfare League first advocated the teaching of the language in schools in 1951. Now, if you, as philanthropists, want to play your part in achieving this kind of societal transformation, you might consider following the example set by conservative foundations in America. Be strategic. Fund programs that are explicitly designed to move national ideology away from its current reliance on colonialism. Focus on the shaping of ideas by providing long-term support for institutions that are willing and able to lead the thinking required in order to make change happen. Sponsor national and local level advocates, organisations, practitioners and theorists who are dedicated to dismantling colonial structures and to building a truly just Aotearoa founded on Te Tiriti o Waitangi. Most important of all, trust Māori to lead this work. Māori have a long tradition of setting out for a destination beyond the farthest horizon, particularly when our present circumstances compel us to imagine a better future. We will continue to work towards eliminating the toxic influence of colonialism from Aotearoa, and we will do that because our survival depends on it. How or whether you choose to support us to do good by undoing colonialism, that is up to you. Kia ora tātou.